we'll be discussing the ideas of... how should we pronounce this philosopher's name?
You just break Nietzsche into two parts, neets and she. The first part rhymes with beets, the second part sounds like shell without the l. But the pronunciation of his adjective should be neets-sheean.
Okay. Okay, what can you tell us about his life and background?
Well, Friedrich Nietzsche was born in a small town in Germany where his father was the local Lutheran pastor. That was in 1844. And as a student, Nietzsche was a brilliant student of Latin and ancient Greek, and he grew up with a fascination and a reverence for the ancient Greek culture. And until the age of 20, he had a vigorous, healthy life. Then he had a serious accident which affected his health for the rest of his life. He had a lot of pain and things like that. But even despite that injury, he was able to become a professor of classical languages in a university in Switzerland at a surprisingly young age, very unusually young age. But unfortunately, he had to quit that job later because of his health problems. Plus, he was developing severe headaches, he had eye problems, etc. He was a real mess. Anyway, he became interested in philosophy during this time. He wasn't actually a philosopher by training, but he became
like a
interested.
linguist?
Yeah, classical languages, Latin, Greek, Hebrew. Too. Then, at the same time as he developed interest in philosophy, he also came to reject the Christian religion and the morality that Christianity taught.
Okay, but he grew up religious. And so before you go on, that reminds me of something. It's interesting. Didn't we talk about with Michel Foucault, another philosopher, he rejected his father too, who was a doctor?
Doctor, that's right.
And Foucault also became not exactly a doctor, but a psychoanalyst?
Yeah, he studied the philosophy of psychology and was interested in the treatment of mental illness, the medical field, and he became a bitter critic of the medical profession. So we can see with both Nietzsche and with Foucault some kind of Freudian reaction with both these men. But anyway, getting back to Nietzsche, he was a proud man and a very difficult man. He had a lot of health problems, as I said, and after he quit the professorship in Switzerland, he became almost unemployable because of his attitude. He had extreme opinions, and he criticized all the other philosophers. I mean, if you really want to make a living as a philosopher, it's not a good idea to call all the other philosophers cabbage heads. Right? He didn't make much money in his life. His books didn't sell very well. He had a habit of turning his friends into enemies, and he had absolutely no luck with women. And on top of all that, at the age of 44, as if this wasn't enough, at the age of 44, he had a serious mental and physical breakdown. The reasons for this are mysterious. We still don't actually know what the problem was. But for the last 11 years of his life, he couldn't walk or talk or write. He was a real mess, basically, until 1900, when he died.
Okay, so that's also funny because Derrida, who we also talked about, was angered other philosophers too, right? But okay, that's something else. What do we need to know about Nietzschean philosophy?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to be said is that for a long time his ideas have been misunderstood. And that's not really his fault. It's the fault of his evil sister.
I've heard of her.
Elizabeth, yes. We'll talk about her later. She did a lot of damage. But anyway, if we want to talk about specific Nietzschean ideas, perhaps the first one we should discuss is the idea of the Übermensch, the widely misunderstood idea of the Übermensch. Übermensch was unfortunately translated into English as the Superman.
Right, but this has nothing to do with the comics superhero, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Nietzsche was convinced that the psychology of humans is not yet fully developed. Modern humans have not developed the full capacity psychologically. He thinks that humans were just a middle stage, a kind of transition stage between lower life and higher humans. In fact, he wrote somewhere that man is just a rope between the animals and the Übermensch. And in German, Über means over or above, and Mensch means human. So I'll explain what he meant by that. This world is all that we have, he said. there's no heaven, there's no hell waiting for us after we die. So the idea of living your life in the expectation of a reward after you die, or in fear of punishment after you die, is just a waste of time. It's bad because it makes you live your life feeling guilty and afraid, which is not a good way to live. So he also thought it prevents us from reaching our full potential as humans. Because you see, humans in Nietzschean thought, we're in a transition stage, and Christianity is preventing us from going to the next stage. We can and we must become better than ordinary humans. We must become Übermenschen, which is superhumans.
Okay.
And I'll explain what he meant by that. The outdated morality which we have inherited from Christianity makes us focus on an imaginary world after we die, and to ignore the real world that we live in. That makes us limit our ambitions, makes us limit our thoughts, makes us deny ourselves the good things in this life. And for him, the good things in this life are things like intellectual curiosity, power, sexual pleasure, courage, independence, intelligence, all the things, in fact, that he thought made the pre-Christian Greek culture so vibrant and so rich.
Okay.
And if we abandon the moral and mental handicaps that Christianity has pushed on us, we can reach our full potential and become superior humans.
Right.
In other words, Übermenschen.
Okay. And so that helps explain why he's so controversial. I see. But did he give some examples, like of a superior human?
Yeah, he did.
And Übermenschen?
All the examples he gave were men.
Okay.
And they're all European men.
Yeah, well, that figures.
He was very much a child of the 19th century.
Yeah, well.
But anyway, these were men who lived their lives full of intelligence, passion, courage, independence, all that sort of stuff. Napoleon was one. And so was the German writer Johann von Goethe.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Who was greatly admired. And then there was the French writer from the 1500s, Michel de Montaigne.
And he was quiet. Like, he didn't go fighting or traveling.
But he fulfilled the criteria of an Übermensch. As to Socrates, maybe. There's some discussion about that. But the common factors among all these men were they didn't care how people thought about them. They just lived their lives in their own way. And they embraced all of life's pleasures. Plus, this is a very important point, they embraced all of life's pains too. Because in Nietzschean thought, if you want to achieve greatness, you have to endure suffering and pain. Suffering and pain are essential if you want to achieve greatness. And so suffering and pain are actually good things. By the way, he thought of himself as a superior.
Well, he might as well. If he made it the...
Why not?
the defining characteristic. Yeah. And he had a lot of pain.
Yeah. He did, yeah.
But going back to the religion thing, so I think a lot of us know he said, God is dead. So what's that all about?
You read my mind, that's my next point. According to Nietzsche, if you place yourself under a god in any religion, you automatically make yourself weak. You automatically impose a slave mentality on yourself. Only by declaring that God is dead can you shake off this slave mentality and live your life as a free and autonomous individual.
Okay, so does that have anything to do with this phrase, will to power?
Before I try to explain what he meant by the will to power, I should explain what he did not mean, because this is badly misunderstood.
Yeah.
In the 1930s and 1940s in Europe, as you know, fascist political parties came to power, and they used this idea of the will to power in a distorted way. They took it to mean a will to domination, so that they said, or they thought, that aggression and violence were good things, good and necessary things. Complete distortion of Nietzsche's idea. He had no ambition to promote racist ideology, aggression, nationalism. In fact, for a Nietzschean thinker, anyone who follows Nietzschean thought, such things as political ideology, race, nationalism, these are a complete waste of time.
So I just thought he was nationalistic. I'm just surprised to hear that.
No, he thought these are minor things. Instead of thinking about races or political parties or political ideologies or nation states, you should be thinking about a much more important thing, which is how to lead a good life.
Okay.
But let's get back to that point in a minute, the good life thing. I want to talk more about the will to power.
Okay.
We all have this drive in us. Every living thing, from plants to us, have a drive to succeed, to be ambitious, to keep going, to continue, to explore new worlds, to boldly go. It's kind of an ambitious drive within all of us. And an example can be, you think about some species, could be animal or plant, which suddenly has an opportunity to expand its numbers by exploiting a new environment. It'll just keep expanding until it can't expand anymore. It'll never stop halfway. It's okay, that's enough, boys, let's stop. It'll just keep going to the maximum. It's the same with us, right? We humans will do the same thing, given a chance. But it's not an excuse for aggression or racism or nationalism. And like I said before, the idea is to focus not on these minor incidental things, but to focus on how to lead a good life.
That's good. Okay, so how do we judge a good life? Maybe that would...
Nietzsche had a really, really fascinating thought experiment about how to decide if you've led a good life. He asks you to imagine that you have to relive every moment of your life, but not just one time. You have to relive every moment of your life forever. Now, that's a frightening thought. That means you haven't led a good life. But if it's not a frightening thought, if it's a pleasant thought, that means you've led a good life. Now, in this system, you'll notice a couple of things. One is that your life is not judged according to whether you're punished or whether you're rewarded after you die. And also, your life is not judged according to moral standards. Moral standards are not permanent. They come and go. They change over time. In this system, you get to judge your life right here and right now. This gives clarity to your life.
Interesting. Yeah. So he didn't believe in moral truths.
He didn't believe in absolute moral truths because if they were absolute, they would be eternal. And he was convinced they were not eternal. I mean, historical evidence shows that moral standards change, they come and go. So they're not eternal, so they can't be absolute.
Okay, when you were talking about the expansion of species and the, we don't just stop and say, okay, it made me think of Darwinism, evolution. Yeah. Now, so was he influenced by either Darwin's natural selection or by social Darwinism?
Yes, interesting. He actually was impressed by Darwinian thought at first, but for a very strange reason, he actually rejected Darwinian thought in the end. He actually thought that natural selection would prevent evolution, not cause it. He had his reasons for that, but actually I think it was a lapse in judgment. Really. But anyway, to be honest, Nietzsche was not really concerned with physical change, how the human body changed over time or anything. He was much more concerned with how people live and how they think. And that's for the other question you raised, social Darwinism. You're asking about the way people in the late 1800s and early 1900s, some people were advocating the use of social engineering and artificial selection to make society protect and help the strongest and most intelligent members of society, and to neglect the weaker and less intelligent members of society, so they would eventually disappear, and the human race in general and society in particular would become stronger. Nietzsche completely rejected that idea. He may have been actually conscious of his own bad physical condition when he wrote that weakness is not necessarily a bad thing. Because weakness can actually lead to a different kind of strength. And he used the example of a man with one eye. And normally we would think if you have only one eye, that's a problem. But for Nietzsche, he said, if you think this through, it's possible that the one eye can be made to do the work of two eyes. It can become strong enough to be equal to two eyes. So we shouldn't automatically think that weakness is always a bad thing.
That just surprised me. I just had thought he was connected with the social Darwinism thing.
No.
Because later he was connected with the Nazis. But okay, so is that his sister?
Yes,
Can you
yes,
explain that connection?
Yeah, when his sister Elizabeth was married to a real nut job, basically. A guy who was involved in extreme right-wing politics in Germany, a guy who had a violent hatred of the Jewish people. They went to South America to start a colony for pure German people. The colony failed. The husband committed suicide, and Elizabeth returned to Germany in 1893. At this time, her brother was already...
Right, crazy.
He couldn't walk or talk or write. He was bedridden. He couldn't stand up or anything. So she started editing his unpublished papers. He had a lot of stuff he'd written but had not yet published. But she twisted his words so that the message was supportive of her husband's extreme right-wing, anti-Semitic, nationalistic ideas. And then after the First World War, when Germany was in chaos and there was a struggle between the extreme right and the extreme left for control of Germany, ambitious politicians like Adolf Hitler in particular were very attracted to these ideas that were published by Elizabeth in her brother's name without her brother's knowledge. You should remember, he had no idea that this was happening.
Yeah.
And later on, scholars were able to decide what was really written by Nietzsche and what was falsely published in his name by his sister. But by then it was already too late. By then Nietzsche's name was already being connected to fascism. Yeah, the damage was done, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so if we were to meet a Nietzschean today, what kind of person would he be?
What kind of person would he be? That's right, he would be a he. I doubt very much if there are any female Nietzscheans. It's possible in theory, but if you read through the bibliographies, the references, it's very unusual to find a woman who writes about Nietzsche.
Really?
So anyway, we're talking about a guy, I think, who would be very ambitious, would have very strong ideas, would be extremely individualistic in his approach. He'd be sort of radically individualistic, I think. He would lead his life in a very passionate, unique way. And he would probably be the kind of guy who would be invited to a lot of parties, but only once. And I would hope that he wouldn't experiment with a Nietzschean mustache. Yeah. You never know.
With hipsters now.
Okay. So that's the kind of guy we're talking about, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Because now I'll look him up now, because I kind of had avoided reading.
I know, he's scary, I know.
Yeah.
Even his picture is scary.
Well, yeah, the mustache doesn't help.
Yeah, no, right.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay.